Greet everyone from South England. This is our study group on Spiritist psychology. And tonight we have Dr. Lionel Corbett with us. And the topic that we're going to study tonight is psychological types and spirituality. Now, I'd like to hand it over to Dr. Lionel. Over to you, Lionel.
Okay, thank you, Fabrizio. So I'd like to, before I go into the details of how typology affects one's spirituality, I thought it might be useful just to review the basics of Jung's typology, because I know it's difficult to grasp when you've only heard the material once. So I'm going to share my screen and show a PowerPoint. I hope. Yes. So I hope you can see this PowerPoint.
Yes, you can.
I can. Good. Okay. So this is the beginning of the typology. Jung was very interested in the fact that he and Freud and Adler could develop very different psychological theories, and he wondered how to account for that. And he decided the reason they came up with different theories is that their mental makeup was different. They were different psychological types. So people with different temperaments see the world differently. So that was the origin of the typology, really. Now we find it useful in understanding relationships, especially partnerships, marriages, and also in psychotherapy, and also in choosing the right career, because some psychological types are very good at certain careers and not at others. In a business, for example, you want to get the right person with the right temperament in the right job. And if you can understand the typology, it makes you tolerant of other people. You realize that they are seeing the world in a different way, perhaps, than you do. And for the therapists who are present, we sometimes see the origin of psychopathology in typology. For example, if you have a family in which most of the family, the parents and most of the siblings are all thinking types, and there's a child who's a feeling type in the family, this leads to real severe misunderstanding in families. And sometimes the child's true type is not allowed to emerge because they feel they have to accommodate themselves to the typology of the family preference. And this leads to the idea of what's called the greenhouse function, where one function which wouldn't be normally that person's main function gets overdeveloped as if it's been in a greenhouse. And this point here is important. It's very important that we shouldn't pigeonhole people. We shouldn't assume that all thinking types or all feeling types are all the same. That's much too simplistic. So let's bear that in mind. So briefly, according to Jung, there are two attitudes of consciousness. And what he means by that is that the extrovert likes to go out into the world and deal with the world. Extroverted people are very interested in what's going on out there, people and events in the world. And so extroverts are usually quite well adjusted to the environment, and they cope with it very well. And sometimes this can be extreme. Extreme extroverts are not very good at dealing with their inner world. They may not even know how they feel internally or what they think, because they're so governed by what's going on in the outer world. So their whole behavior is determined by factors in the outer world, not in their own subjectivity. These are people who are very keen on the latest music, the latest fashion, and they generally behave in a way that meets the expectations of other people. Now, introverts are the opposite. The introverted attitude is for one's interests to go inside, to concentrate on one's own subjectivity. What's important to me? how do I feel, or what do I think? And that becomes much more important than what's going on in the outer world. So when there is, of course, there's always information from the outer world, but it doesn't have as big an effect as the person's internal response to the outer world. What matters is not so much what the outer world is doing, but how I interpret it, what it means to me for an introvert. Now, of course, there are degrees of introversion and extroversion. And the extreme introverts are people that we call schizoid. They're often very solitary people who don't interact much. But that's a kind of an extreme type of introvert. The extreme extroverts are often dismissed as hysterical. So the introvert is interested in how the outer world affects me. And introverts are not very good at dealing with the outer world. At parties, for example, or dinner parties or cocktail parties, they find it hard to make small talk. They find it hard to make conversation. And they feel they don't want to share their inner world with other people. And so sometimes they come across as if they're rather aloof and not interested in other people, as if they don't care about other people. And so they're often introverts, extreme introverts are often seen as a bit peculiar because they keep to themselves so much, and their opinions often seem very eccentric. And sometimes if you ask them how they feel or what they think, they can't really tell you. They just have a kind of internal, like an internal yardstick or a gold standard, and they measure everything in terms of what's going on inside them. Anyway, so these are the two attitudes, and one of them usually is more prominent than the other. So, of course, most of us have a mixture of the two attitudes, but sometimes one attitude is much more visible than the other. And this can lead to conflict. Introverted people find extroverted people very superficial. They like the fact that extroverts can deal well with the outer world and do well at dinner parties and so on. While extroverts find introverts very unusual. They can't tell what's going on they can't understand their behavior. Oh, somebody's raised their hand. Is that Jan? Did you want to ask a question at this point?
I did. Are we allowed to ask questions now, or should we save the questions to the end?
I don't. Anahy, do you have feelings about that?
It's your call, Lionel.
No, okay, I'm happy. Yeah, please ask your question now. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, my question is if with the same person, the different types can express due to different environments. So a person might be very extrovert in one environment, but in a different environment, she might feel that she's very introverted, or he or she.
Yes, that's true. But still there's a preference. And sometimes, for example, if you put an introverted into a cocktail party, they may feel obliged to socialize and mix with other people, but it wouldn't be their preference. So I agree with you. It's more of a strain for the introvert. And what can happen is typically, as I'll show you in a minute, if the first function is introverted, the second function is usually extroverted. So an introverted person who's forced to be extroverted will rely on what we call the second function. There's always some function in the personality that's extroverted, so they can rely on that, but you won't see the person's primary function. That's how I would answer that.
Thank you.
Just a quick note about Freud. A lot of people think that Freud's theory is a feeling type theory, because you see the fact that he's so interested in sexuality means that he's very interested in other people. He's oriented towards the outer world, because sexuality implies this strong relationship between subject and object. And the other thing about the feeling function, when it's superior, the thinking function is often undeveloped. And undeveloped thinking is rather inflexible. What I've said here is monomodal. It's restricted. Freud's sexual theory tries to explain everything. That's not complex thinking. Complex thinking would have multiple explanations. So a lot of people think that the thinking is not well developed, and it's really a feeling type theory. Okay, so we've talked about the attitudes. Let's talk about the functions. There are two ways of getting information about the world. One is through the five senses, seeing, hearing, touching, and so on. And we call that the sensation function. And through the five senses, you get concrete information about the world. You see or hear or touch something and so on. There's another way to get information, which is through intuition. When you have an intuition about something, it's your unconscious which is having the perception, and it doesn't come through the five senses. It just pops into your mind. Okay. And often you can't say where it comes from. It doesn't come from something that you see or hear and so on. So, but it's very often a valid way of getting information about the outer world for people who have good intuition. So intuition can see possibilities. It's not very good at seeing details, but it can often see round corners. It can see things which are not immediately present. It often appears in dreams as a smelling or a nose, because you can somehow sense with your intuition or smell something which isn't actually physically present. Anyway, so those are two ways of getting the information. But then when you get the information, you have to make a judgment about it. And there are two ways of making a judgment. One is through thinking, one is through feeling. The thinking functions will tell you the name of when you perceive something. The thinking function will classify it for you and tell you what it is and link it to other things of the same type. It's a logical function. As I've said here, thinking is about cause and effect relationships. But the feeling function is quite different. When you see something or hear something and so on, and you've decide whether you like it or not, whether it's important to you. Is this desirable to me? That's not a thinking, that's a feeling function. It's about values. And it's often instantaneous. You like something or you don't like something, you accept it or you reject it, but those are feeling judgments. So you have two kinds of judgment: the logic of thinking, classifying everything, giving it a name, and the logic of feeling, which is about, is this important to me? Do I like this? And technically speaking, the feeling function is not the same as emotion. It means whether you can be in touch with your emotion and sort your emotion and be conscious and discriminate your emotions. And as I've said on this slide, Jung made what most of us nowadays think is a mistake. He said that feeling was feminine and thinking is masculine. Most of us nowadays think that's a kind of old stereotype. That's just, the cultural bias of his time was about women feeling and men thinking. I think now it's perfectly obvious that you can have women with highly developed thinking and men with highly developed feeling. So that's a stereotype that I think we've gotten rid of. Okay, so this slide shows what are called the superior and inferior functions. So there are four functions, you remember: intuition, sensation, thinking, and feeling. One of those four is what we call the superior function. It means the one you're the best at, your main function, okay? And he thought these were opposites. If you have If feeling is your best function, your thinking is going to be your worst function. If thinking is your best function, your feeling function is going to be your worst function. So he saw them as pairs of opposites. Intuition, remember, these are two ways of perceiving the world. And he thought they were opposites. People who are good at intuition are usually not good at sensation. Sensation is about details. And intuitive types are notoriously bad at details. I speak from personal experience. So if you're high on sensation, you may be very good at dealing with the details of the outer world, but your intuition can be quite unreliable. So this is an important aspect of the typology, that we all have what we call the fourth function, or the inferior function, okay? And your complexes will tend to be attached to your inferior function, or to the anima or the animus. So the inferior function, or the fourth function, is the most problematic part of the personality. That's where we tend to get into our most unconsciousness, is in the fourth function. So superior, inferior, and then the other two can be third and fourth in any order. So if you're feeling type, your second function could be either sensing or intuition. If you're a thinking type, your second function could be sensing or intuition. And then, so that would be the second and third function. I hope that's clear. I can go over it again if it's not clear. Now, I can go into some of the details of the different, what the different types look like, if it would be interesting to you. And would that be of general interest to go into more detail about the typology? Or I could just move to the spirituality talk. But I could, it depends on how interested you are in these details.
Lionel, hello, good evening.
Hi.
I would love if you would go through a little bit, give you examples and everything, rather than go straight into spirituality.
Oh, okay. Well,
if everyone agrees.
Okay, let's do that then. So each function, thinking, feeling, sensation, intuition, can either operate outwardly, we call that the extroverted way of doing it, or internally in an introverted manner. So your sensation function, remember, it's how you get material from the five senses. If it goes out to the outer world, we call that extroverted sensation. These are really reality oriented. These are people who are very good at dealing with details in the outer world. I always think in this, how the British royalty, when they're opening Parliament and doing some official function, they always dress up with all the jewels and the robes and all the performance. That's very extroverted sensation. And a lot of people think that different cultures have different typologies. So the British tend to be sensation types. The Americans tend to be thinking types, and so on. That's a little bit dubious because it's rather painting with a very broad brush. Anyway, so extroverted sensing types are very good at dealing with the outer world. And of course, their inferior function is intuition. And inferior intuition means they get intuitions, but they're wrong, or they're nutty. So you get jealousy in the sensation type when their intuition gets going, because it's inferior. They start worrying about the worst possible things that might happen. I've given a few examples here: jealousy and sort of dark ideas about what might happen, and so on. That's inferior intuition. So then the sensation function can go inward into the body, where these are people who are very good at knowing what's going on with the body. The ability to perceive and the ability to know detail is applied to the body. So these are people who do things like eye surgery and endodontist work, it's something that's inside the body or very close to the body. They're very, very good at dealing with order, finding the right place for things. I think the French Impressionists were introverted sensing types. You know how they paint trees and grass as if they were different colors that have nothing to do with the actual colors of trees and grass. Well, that's because they don't care about the actual trees and grass. What they care about is how the trees or grass affects them. So if they think it should be purple instead of green, they'll paint it as purple, because that's what the introvert does. They deal with the outer world in their own internal way. So that's why when you talk to introverted sensing types, they can come up with reactions that seem to make no sense, because they're being ruled by a kind of internal sense of order. I don't want to spend too much time on each type, but just to give you a little gist of it. Now, the same is true with the thinking function. The thinking function can go inward or outward. So when it goes inward, we call that introverted thinking. And these are people who have very private ideas. So when they see something, they will take it inside, and it's as if they have an internal kind of a gold standard. They know what's true based on only on their own subjectivity. Okay, so they want the outer world to accommodate itself to fit with their own theory. And so they're very good at developing theoretical systems. But because their feeling function is inferior, you see, when you talk to them, you don't get any feeling from them. And so they seem to be cold. They seem to be uninterested in people. You just don't see any feeling. I've given here the example of, if you know the Star Trek series, Mr. Tuvok or Spock, these are thinking types. As they talk, you don't see any feelings or emotion or anything. And often when you talk to introverted sensing types, they make you feel like you don't know what you're talking about, because they are so committed to their own internal ideas of what's correct or not. And so they're difficult to talk to. They're not empathic. Now, extroverted thinking means that the thinking goes out into the outer world. So they order their thinking according to what's going on out there. And they're just interested in how to get the most logical result. They're very good practical politicians and businessmen. They just want to order the outer world and get things done. They like general principles, you know, sort of Charles Darwin types. Look for some formula that applies to a large number of observations. I've said here that they have clear ideas of what's right and wrong, that when I see public prosecutors on television talking about something, they have that extroverted thinking. And again, the feeling function is very weak. They hardly know how they feel. So they're difficult to relate to. You don't see much in the way of emotion. Again, intuition, when it goes out into the outer world, will just be able to see possibilities in the outer world that other people might not be able to see. And very often they will have an idea about something that's going on, but they can't justify it because it's not based on facts. It's just something that they've perceived via the unconscious. So these are people, as I've said here, like entrepreneurs or stockbrokers, who, you know, people who can do the right thing out there intuitively without maybe even having a lot of data. So their sensation function is weak. So they're no good at details. They're good at the big picture, but no good at details. And they're usually out of touch with the body, so that they often eat too much because they're not in touch with the because they're so extroverted, they're not in touch with the interior of the body. They get exhausted very easily and so on. Shall I go on with this? Is this still useful? Oh, yes. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, so the next type is the intuitive type. This is my own typology. This is when intuition goes into the inner world, into the unconscious, the world of the archetypes, the world of spirituality. Introverted intuitives are hardly interested in the outer world. The outer world's not really important at all. It's the inner world that matters. The only thing about the outer world that's interesting is what it stimulates in the introverted intuitive. These are people who may find it very difficult to express themselves. So they have to find something like painting or writing or music as a way of expressing what's going on inside them. And spirituality is usually very important to introverted intuitive types. They're often very good in the ministry and priesthood, that kind of thing, because that's where they're at home. They're not at home in the physical world. And of course, if intuition is your first function, you have very weak sensations. So again, they're not good at the body, they're clumsy, they have, the office is always a mess, the house is untidy, because they're not good at dealing with sensation details in the outer world. They're not good at money and that kind of thing. But they're good at dealing with spiritual issues. And then there's extroverted feeling. Extroverted feeling types are very concerned with how people relate to each other. They want to know what the interpersonal atmosphere is like. They can feel emotion in other people. They're very enthusiastic socially. I found a lot of TV anchors are very good at this kind of extroverted feeling types. They're very good at dinner parties and cocktail parties because they go around and they want to make sure that everybody is happy, because that's where they're at home, in the outer world of feelings. But again, their thinking function is inferior. So they're very good at feeling, but they can't think. When we get students who are feeling types, they just can't, sometimes they just cannot put their thoughts into words because the thinking function is so sort of undeveloped. So they tend not to do well in examinations, but they can be excellent therapists because they know how people feel and they care about how people feel. But they don't do well in examinations and so on. Introverted feeling types, the feeling function goes inward. So sometimes you can't even tell that they're having a feeling. They look like they're cold. They're not cold. That's a real mistake. This is, I've said here, I love you, but it's none of your business. They may feel very strongly about something, but you wouldn't know it from the outside because all the feelings go inward. This is still waters run deep. You just can't tell what they're feeling very often. And they're not interested in other people knowing how they feel. They may tell you how they feel, but they may not care whether you know how they feel or not. And they always have the sense that this or that situation or whatever it is, there's always a correct feeling for it. So they can be very compassionate. They care a lot about feelings. You just can't see it. I've given the example here of Cordelia from Shakespeare's play. When King Lear asks his daughters how they feel about him, she says, "I cannot cast my heart into my mouth." It's a beautiful example of introverted feeling. She loved her father, but she couldn't put it into words because she's an introverted feeling type. So if an introverted feeling type wants to communicate how he feels, he induces the feeling in other people. You sit with them, and after a while, you start to feel what they're feeling. It's very interesting. And again, here I've said that their thinking function is inferior. So they get wild ideas. They get just conspiracy theories and sort of crazy ideas based on thinking which is completely inferior. John Beebe made this distinction. He said the Russians are introverted feeling types and the Americans are extroverted thinking types, and these types are completely incompatible. So that's, he thinks, is part of the tension between the two countries. Well, that's a sort of a brief overview of the let me see if I stop screen sharing now. So that's a brief overview of the typology. So I could stop at that point and then go into the business about how this applies to spirituality. But are there any questions about that? I'm sorry if it was too quick. It's just a huge subject, obviously. Or did that feel like a flood?
Sylvia?
Yes, thank you.
Yes.
I know that this, thank you, by the way, it was really good having the details where you explained. I know that one always dominant and the others, but is there ever a time when the dominant becomes weak and, you know, they sort of come together more or less in a line in the personality?
Yes.
Can this happen? Could you talk about a bit? Thank you.
In mature people, one of Jung's notions was that in the individuation process, you develop your inferior functions. So as people mature, because the inferior function develops, it gets closer to consciousness. You get better at dealing with it, and they do tend to come together. But I think the inferior function always remains a weak spot. It never gets really well developed. It just kind of improves. There are ways to develop it. I mean, if you're an intuitive and you want to develop your sensation function, you know, take up gardening or something that requires attention to detail. You know, if you're a thinking type, you want to develop your feeling function, go work in a hospice or something like that, volunteering, then you'll develop your feeling function. So Jung's idea was that in the individuation process, one should try to develop one's inferior function. That's an ideal. I've almost given up trying to develop my sensation function, but ideally that's the idea. So the answer to your question is yes. And there are some people, like June Singer didn't like to think of these functions as opposites. She thought of them on a spectrum, and you know, like a sliding scale. And she thought you could bring them together. So there are different sort of takes on the typology. And you definitely find in mature people that it's harder to type them because they've developed all the functions. But I think the typology is innate. I don't think it's developmental. I think you're born a certain type. But I'm not sure if that's the official, I'm not sure if that's official or not, but that's what I think.
Lionel, before Tanya and John, the question that was in the WhatsApp group was just part of it. Was, I'll just give you here, was exactly that, are our personality types determined before we incarnate, okay?
Yeah.
And do our physical bodies play a part in the definition of the types? And Jung, in the end of psychological types, he thinks there could be a parallel between the development of the types and biology, right? What do you think about that?
I do think the types are innate. I'm not sure if everybody thinks that, but I think you're born a certain type. And I'm not sure that there's a relationship to the physical body or not. I haven't noticed that. Have you noticed that, Anahy? I haven't noticed that.
No, I haven't. But von Franz, I told people about her book about the inferior function.
Yeah.
Last meeting, and she says, well, maybe because of actually because of the attitude, the extrovert and introvert.
Yeah.
That, like you can see in the animals, you know, in nature, that some animals just go for it, you know, try to dominate the environment,
Yeah.
and others try to protect, to defend themselves. Something like that, I think, was the discussion, because we know that Jung liked, or sometimes he used the metaphor or analogy with the nature, right? And patterns of behaviors of animals also. So that's why I thought it would be interesting, because the question was about that. We'll leave the spiritual part of if it could be determined previously to incarnate. I think you're going to talk about what you think about that, right?
Yeah, well, I think that I think we are born, or we incarnate with a particular typology. I don't know how it applies to the physical body. I'm sorry, it's just typical of me to ignore that part of the typology, because I have a very poor relationship, because my sensation function is my inferior function. So I tend to ignore the body. So
I can't help you either, because my second my auxiliary function is also intuition.
Is your first function feeling?
People, yes,
Feeling
it's feeling. And the second auxiliary is intuition, and I'm awful with sensation. But just when we go ahead, also in that book that I told people that they couldn't, because von Franz talks really nicely about the inferior function, and Hillman also is talking about the feeling function, I think, in that book. But in the introduction is kind of, von Franz says that, what do you think about that, Lionel? So that makes it a little clearer to people, that differentiation.
Yeah, I would take her word for it. I mean, she knew this stuff. So if that's what she says, let's go with it.
She says that the differentiation between types begins at the beginning of childhood. Like you can see in a 1 year, 1 year and a half years child.
You can see it in babies who have just been born.
Yeah.
You can see extroverted babies are also looking around, interested in what's going on, and introverted babies are kind of more internal, more inward. So I think you can see that distinction immediately. But anyway, so
me too, yes. And the other thing that she says, Lionel, is that the functions appear later. Okay, she says around kindergarten, because then is where we would develop the, you know, the attitudes or Okay, do you agree with that?
Yes. I hate to disagree with von Franz. I mean, I'll get
me too. Who are we, right?
Let's have some more questions.
Okay, go ahead, people.
Over to you, Tanya.
I think you possibly kind of answered this, but my question related to, well, there are two elements. One was ambiversion, because
yes.
I had sort of seen myself in one particular category, but then you described another that was the opposite. You know, it was an I and an E. And as you described it, I was like, God, that's me. And then I kind of realized I've got, you know, I'm probably a mix of the two. And so it just got me thinking about ambiversion. And then the second question was just to clarify, was when you said about primary and secondary types, is that across the EI? Is it across the intuition, sensation, feeling?
Yes, the four functions.
Right. So it's picking 2 out of the 4 that, okay, right.
So one of the 4 is the superior function. The other is the opposite to that is the inferior function. And then the second and third are the other 2. And I think you're right about the ambivert. There are some people who are not predominantly introverted or extroverted. So maybe we should think of it as a kind of sliding scale. But everybody has a mixture of both. For example, in my case, my first function is introverted intuition. My second function is extroverted thinking. So you may not, if my first function is introverted, you won't see it. So I might look like a thinking type because that's the function that goes out into the world, but it's not my main function. But it is extroverted. So most of us have some combination of introversion and extroversion. Yeah, so let's have another question.
Over to you, Jan.
Sorry, Thelma, it's just that I'm logged in as Young, who is our spiritist house. So my question is exactly on the same topic. You mentioned that your sensational function is your inferior function, and you try to develop it, but you gave up. So I assume the different types, they are important for the evolution of the spirit as a whole. So in your next life, for example, you might come with that function as your primary function in order to develop it. How do you see this as coming with different functions in different lifetimes to develop it to a point where when we are really developed, we come with all of them dominantly, or no, we always have a predominantly one, or do we have developed already in a previous life another one? How do you see this?
I don't know, honestly. Maybe I'll come back as a very good sensing type next time, but I don't know. How would we know that? I just don't know. Sorry.
No problem. Okay, thank you.
Maybe. I mean, it makes sense, but I don't know if that's true or not.
Anna Sinclair.
Yes, thank you. Yes, it's going along the same topic because I find it quite intriguing when you mentioned earlier, for example, a child that has, let's say, a feeling primary typology born into a family of thinking parents and siblings, in which they're outside the norm of that family, and that could create some conflict. But on the other hand, that could give an opportunity for that person to be reincarnated in that family to help to promote their thinking function.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
Period, and they're bringing it in, so it's an opportunity rather than it being just like a bad thing, like they're out of place. They're saying that is giving them opportunity to develop the one that's underdeveloped. I don't know what you think of that.
That's an interesting idea. I mean, I'm a bit biased because I just see this in therapy, and so I guess the people I see have suffered from it. But I've seen quite a few people who were born feeling types into thinking. I remember one man who was a feeling type, and his family were all thinking sensing types, and they were all engineers, and they forced him to become an engineer, and he was miserable because he didn't have that kind of mind. So but what you're saying is an idea, but all I can tell you is I have seen it cause emotional difficulty.
Yeah, I do think that, I mean, as much as, I'm not a therapist or anything, I'm quite ignorant, to know typologies, it is quite useful because even as a parent, and you're looking at your child and your child's different to you, and you don't get them, and you go like, oh, of course, they're like more feeling and I'm more thinking. Yeah. So then I can build a bridge as the adult to, to come over. So really, I think it's a really helpful thing in improving human relationships across the board. So thank you so much.
Yes, that's very important. Knowing the typology helps you to forgive other people, and not, because we tend to assume everybody sees the world the way I do, but of course that's not true. So if you know this typology, you make allowances for people seeing the world differently, Yes.
Okay.
Yes, Andreas. Yeah.
Hi, Lionel. Can our
Hi.
typology?
I think it was me. Also Lee. It was you?
I think we said Andreas, but can you hang on a minute and we'll come back?
I think it was my time now, but I can Andreas, no problem. You can ask.
Okay, well, why don't you carry on then, Ilse? Carry on.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's easy, but the last time, Dr. Anahy said we go from more conscious to more unconscious. When I would like to know what I mean about more introvert human being go the way to be more introvert in the future, is it? Or talk about individuation.
I think your question is about the development of consciousness in relation to the typology. Is that correct?
Then not topology.
Oh, not then I didn't understand the question.
No, when we do our way, we go from more unconscious to more unconscious, from conscious to more unconscious. This is about more human being, more introvert.
Yeah. Yes. So, could somebody help me? I'm not sure.
Talk about
Soli, você quer fazer
individuation.
pergunta em português? Eu traduzo para ele.
I can totally help because my question is related to exactly the same. Can the typology change with age in evolution through time? When we're younger, we are different than when we're in our 20s. It's through our hormonal changes, because we're going through hormonal changes and we're going through menopause, female or male, because I have experienced going into different types quite intensely, but over a period, sometimes quite a few years. Depends through the trauma, or it depends through what I have chosen to experience at the time.
As a general rule, in the first part of our lives, we rely on the first two functions, what's called the superior function and the auxiliary function. As we mature, we develop the third and fourth function, so they become more conscious.
Because I have more than one. Maybe I'm not normal. I don't know.
More than one what?
Function. So I can
We all
actually
know everybody has four functions.
Oh, good.
I didn't mean to imply that everybody has a first, a second, a third, and a fourth. It's just that one works better than the other. I don't seem to be making this very clear. Everybody.
No, very clear.
Oh, okay.
I was just wondering, that's where with age, like we could be introvert until we're 40 and then extrovert by the age we're 70.
No, I don't think you change your basic attitude. I think what happens is that you develop the third and fourth functions. And so if one of those is introverted or extroverted, you develop that capacity as you need to deploy it. But it's not where you do best, something like that. It's just something that you develop as a way to. It's a developmental achievement in later life to develop the inferior function.
I think it's Dawn now, Lionel.
Sorry. Oh, Don, yes.
Yeah, thank you. I can attest to the trying to be an engineer when I'm not a thinking person. I did that for 40 years and I was never quite got it. Is there some way? I've just started studying Jung's typology in the past few months. So is there some way to test to determine your primary function?
Yeah, there are several tests. One is the Myers-Briggs.
Yeah.
The other is the gray wheelwright. Those two, yeah, gray-wheelwright. Those are probably the best two.
Okay, yeah, I did the Myers-Briggs years ago, 30 years ago, and I came out an INTP. So I'm not sure what that means anymore. Okay, yeah, I'll just do some research and get some of the books that you recommended here. Well, I actually already got them. Okay. And start reading them, see if I can determine more.
Okay. Well, maybe we should turn to spirituality a little bit. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Yes.
The point about this is that different psychological types have different preferences for their spirituality. And you can see spirituality throughout our spiritual lives. You see it in the Bible. If you think about the book of Genesis, that's trying to tell you how the outer world was created. It's a very extroverted piece of work. If you look at the prophet Jeremiah, who's always sitting moaning how depressed he is and how God should be doing this and that, he's very, very introverted. He's estranged from the outer world. So you can sometimes see typology immediately. Some of the gospel, like the Gospel of Matthew, to me, I think was written by a feeling type. There's a great deal of stress on emotion. And you see that all over. For example, the prophet Micah says, "What does the Lord require of you but to do justice and love kindness?" That came from a feeling type. Then think of the Song of Songs. That, I think, was written by a sensing type. It really stresses the physical body. Think about the Proverbs. I think some of them are written by a thinking type. And if you look at some of St. Paul's arguments, he sounds like a thinking type. And I'm sure the Gospel of John was written by an intuitive, because he says things that are not obvious. They're based on introverted intuition. Anyway, so different temperaments need different spiritualities. And the Hindu tradition has been very good at this. They've said there are different ways to approach the divine. There's the path of the intellect. Some people approach the divine through the mind. There's the path of devotion to God, what's called the bhakti type. There's the path of selfless service to other people. That's the karma yoga. And there's a path based on meditation and yoga. That's hatha yoga. So they've got a typology of 4 different types based entirely on different temperaments. So that's a very ancient typology. Okay. If you're an introverted person, you'll find that private prayer or meditation will come to you quite easily. Introverts like doing things by themselves quietly. Extroverted people like being in a community. They like having the external stimulation of being in a community. So they like communal prayer, group activities. And then, but I shouldn't say that in Western society has a preference for extroversion, sensing and thinking. Western society is not so keen on introverts and intuition and feeling. Very often when there's been some terrible crime, the media people will always say, "Oh, he was a lone wolf," as if being introverted automatically makes the person pathological. There's some suspicion of introversion in the West. So a lot of Westerners who are introverted will find that their spirituality is not quite accepted in the West. There's a demand for them to join communities and pray in community and so on. Whereas in the Eastern traditions, the East has always valued introversion and intuition. So you get that type of spirituality in the East. Now, so Sensing types, remember, sensing types are very good at details. They're realistic, they're practical, they like facts, they like, and so on. So they are very interested in the details of religious rituals. They're the kind of person who's very keen on bricks and mortar, the finances of the church. They'll be good on the vestry, you know, something like that. They like that kind of detail, and they like religious symbols. They're often very good with a rosary beads. The sacraments are very important. They like incense, they like icons, because all that appeals to the sensation function. Whereas introverted sensing types, they might appreciate that kind of material, but it's only a pointer. They're only interested in the icon or the rosary in terms of what subjective effects it has on the person, how it stimulates my imagination to think about what the symbol means. And then there are thinking types who are very keen on the philosophy behind the religion. So they'll be very interested, for example, in trying to see if their religion fits with current science or current social issues. Thinking types might go into the planning or the administration of religious institutions. Okay. They want to be rational. Thinking types, when they're religious, try to have a rational religion. Remember Saint Anselm of Canterbury, the medieval theologian? He said, I believe that I may understand. That's a real thinking type. He said theology is faith seeking understanding. That's very much a thinking type approach to spirituality. And then think of Thomas Aquinas with his 5 proofs of the existence of God. I mean, that's real religious thinking. He's obviously a thinking type. He says that reason is the cornerstone of morality. I mean, that focus on reason is really thinking type spirituality. Now, introverted intuitive types will find the divine inside as a kind of subtle presence inside. That's how it feels to me, as an internal subtle presence. Not so much out there. The introverted intuitives, as I said, are very at home in the spiritual world. It seems quite real. And very often introverted intuitives are contemplatives. And they get spiritual ideas without much evidence because of their intuition. So I think most of them, not about most, many of the mystics are introverted intuitives. I'm thinking of St. John of the Cross, that kind of person, I think, are introverted intuitives. But you also see it, for example, in Ralph Waldo Emerson, Thoreau, probably, some poets like T.S. Eliot, deeply spiritual poet, actually, he was very influenced by John of the Cross. Those kind of poets are probably introverted intuitive. C.S. Lewis, I think. Whereas extroverted intuitives, they're very interested in spiritual transformation in the outer world. They serve God in the world. I mean, think of St. Francis of Assisi. He's very good at, he gets great joy in ministering to others in the outer world. I think he probably was an extroverted intuitive. Mahatma Gandhi always struck me as an extra. His spirituality is expressed in his life and his behavior. That's extroverted intuition. Feeling types, you remember, are very in tune with their emotional life and human values and so on. And if their feeling function is introverted, you can't tell what their spirituality is. They keep it secret. They have a deep inner conviction. but they may not show it. But the feeling types will be very interested in focus on the love of God and repentance, gratitude. Those are emotional, a way of relating to God in an emotional kind of way. I'm thinking of maybe Bernard of Clairvaux, something like the Love Mystics, something like that. So in other words, your typology is going to affect the way that your spirituality very much. Think of, so I mentioned the Hindu tradition having the 4 yogas. One is the path of knowledge. You approach to the divine using the intellect. I think the Buddha probably was in that category. Maybe Zen Buddhists are like that. These are very often people who have a very impersonal God image. They call God the absolute. They don't have a kind of warm, loving, personal relationship when there's a very strong thinking function, I think. But if you think that God is your lover, your friend, that you relate to God in love, then you're what the Hindus would call a bhakti, a devotional type. Ramakrishna is the great Indian example of that. Just very, very devotional. Maybe Martin Luther in the Christian tradition, he stresses feeling quite a bit. He had a lot of quite practical goodness, I think, and his notion that God is personal and loving, I think that's kind of a feeling type spirituality. God gives salvation to humanity as a free gift of grace out of his love for the human race. Yeah, the more I think about it, the more that seems like a feeling type spirituality. Then the karma yoga in Hinduism, the people who selfless service to the world, they would be a combination usually of sensing and thinking. I wonder, I mean, there's a certain type of person that likes authority, that likes rules, that likes structures, and, right and wrong. And I get that when I read St. Paul, for example, in the Pauline letters, you get this kind of legalistic sense. It's a mix. I think there's a strong thinking function there. So maybe Martin Luther King, who had a tremendous sense of civic duty, very good administrator, leadership quality. That's kind of a mixture of thinking and sensing, I think. And then think of people like Mother Teresa. What was her typology? I mean, she cares so deeply about people, very empathic, inspiring, idealistic. That's a combination probably of feeling and intuition, I think. That's selfless action towards others for the sake of God. I think she probably was some combination of feeling and intuition. So in other words, there's no single type of spiritual practice that applies universally to everyone. I think it's a mistake to try to impose a certain type of spiritual practice on everyone. I think that different types are drawn to different types of spirituality. So I would say the function of a religious community is to help the person find the kind of practice that best suits their personality type. But I know it's not easy to assess typology because we do tend to deploy different functions in different situations, as was mentioned before. Well, let me see. Can we stop there and have questions about that? do you agree or disagree with my typological diagnoses?
I'm thinking, Lionel,
Yeah.
that in the Spiritist community
Yeah.
that we tried, this group also tries to put together. It's interesting because, and I have here a lot of people that know a lot about Spiritism. Because if we think of Allan Kardec using the scientific method, okay, to codify all the knowledge that the spirits were telling, you would think of a thinking type, let's say, right? Because
the emphasis on knowledge, yeah.
Yeah.
That's very
But then, in the Spiritist knowledge, it is stressed a lot, charity, you know, and the way we should, all the Jesus teachings about forgiveness and about understanding one another, loving one another. So when we think about people like you have met Divaldo in Bahia, or people that met Chico Xavier, that I think they are kind of very introverted intuition type. They lived pretty much, and I'm talking about this because I think it's important for people to, for us to make this connection. That's all about this group, to try to understand Jung's, Jung's psychology and the spiritual knowledge that comes through the Spiritism. So would you think that, could we say, let's think, I'm asking you and also for everybody to, I would love to hear their opinion, that when you have something quite open as a Spiritism, Allan Kardec wrote that there's three main focus on Spiritism, that is science, philosophy, and religion in terms of understanding the spirit. So could we say that something like the Spiritist knowledge would embrace this need for, to different typologies to help people to be doing or connecting with the spiritual realms in their own, respecting their own psychological types?
Yes, that's very good. I think if you stress knowledge, you're stressing thinking. If you're stressing compassion and empathy for other people, you're stressing feeling. If you're stressing work, doing work in the world, that's a sensation function, and so on. I mean, you can use all the functions. So
I think Anne wants to say something.
Yeah, can I come in? Yeah, I just, thank you, Anahy, because you that was exactly what I was thinking. One, I was trying to think, was Allan Kardec a thinking type, and, the knowledge and all this. But it is true, when Dr. Lionel was talking about in Hinduism and the different pathways that suit the different typologies, I think it's the same in Spiritism. And I think, some people, they feel more connected with the knowledge or the philosophy, and others feel more connected with doing the charity, making the soup, going to visit the homeless, whatever. And that sometimes some people want to impose what is their preference on others, and that we need to respect the typologies and why some people would be choosing to exercise their spirituality, their understanding, their connection in particular pathways, and that there is no right or wrong, but which is the thing that suits each individual. I find that this is really interesting for me to think about, because we do have sometimes some differences of opinion and people wanting to be, right, and want, this kind of thing. So this is really helpful, I think. So that was my 5 minutes. Sorry.
No, that's fine. No, we have a bad habit of wanting people to think to see the world the way we do, you know. It's you have to find the right setting for the person. You don't want your accountant to be somebody who's no good at details, you know. Or your surgeon has to be very good at details, you know. That if you're an engineer, you're going to build a bridge, you have to be very good at sensation details. But you know, so there's a whole field of using the Myers-Briggs typology to get people in the right occupation. People who are very good at feeling, you know, who are very good in helping professions, nurses and so on. You know, that kind of thing. So in a religious community, you have to find the right position for the type.
And Lionel,
sorry, yes.
No, go ahead, go ahead.
No, I was saying, if some people, the intuitives tend to be visionaries, you know, but they're no good at details. You don't want to give an intuitive like me some kind of administrative job, because it just wouldn't work. So it's really, so
we need Fabrizio for that,
yeah,
you know.
yeah,
And Fabrizio.
well, you know, God puts the right people in the right place.
Yes, yeah. And I just wanted to ask you, Lionel, and tell everyone here. I was reading a little bit about what Joannei de Angelis, so we all know now the light teacher, the Divaldo's mentor. She says in one of her books, exactly this. I translated to English because it's still in Portuguese. She says, Lionel and everybody, intuition comes from the self, from her point of view. She says, as a perception that opens the doors of the paranormal for the acquisition of knowledge that is independent of feeling, thought, and sensation. Would you agree with that? What's your idea?
Could you repeat that again? Sorry, Anahy. There was a lot in it, please.
Oh, do you want me to read again?
Yeah, there was a lot in it, please. Thank you.
Okay. Joannei de Angelis says that intuition for her comes from the self, capital S, as a perception that opens the doors of the paranormal for the acquisition of knowledge that is independent of feeling, thought, and sensation.
The way Jung sees intuition is that he sees it as perception by means of the unconscious, rather than through the five senses. So in the sense that the self is the totality of the psyche. It includes the unconscious. So to me, the self includes everything. I wouldn't narrow intuition down quite so narrowly, I think. I just would say that intuition is perception through the unconscious.
Is that not the same thing? The self with S, capital letter, it will be the totally of the unconsciousness.
Oh, well, the self includes everything, you see. So saying it comes from the self, you know, it's really not saying anything, because the self is the totality. So everything comes from the self.
Okay, but here I think she's talking, Lionel. Remember that she, for her, the self with capital S is the spirit. Yeah. So I think she's saying that it's in this depth of the unconscious, not in the, you know, not in the personal unconscious or something like that.
Yeah.
That intuition would be a way to connect, like, you know, like coming from the self, from the spirit, some information to the ego, let's say, or to our experience here in our personality. I think she meant something like that.
Yeah, it seems to come from the spiritual dimension. That's maybe what she's saying. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so.
I think that's right. Yeah. Because the sensation is physical, seeing, touching, tasting, and so on. Those are physical, where intuition comes from a non-physical realm. So that would be the way to say it. Yeah.
Okay.
So we
Anybody
have
else?
Yes, we have Richard and Lindalva for the question. Over to you, guys.
I just saw a question about the typology, tests for the typology. So I'll put that in the chat if I can't seem to find the chat, actually.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, Lionel, if you could share with us that on WhatsApp group, because many people is asking me that, actually.
But I can't see the chat in the, oh, here it is, I found it, yeah, sorry. So it's, so the other type is gray wheelwright. That's the name of the other test.
Okay, over to Richard and Lindalva, please.
It's me. I just want to thank you for bringing this totally new information. And on my reflections, I was also thinking like, because as a mother, I struggled a lot to when my children came to the point in which they were choosing what to do with their lives. And some of them, especially one of them who wanted to go to the army, I struggled a lot with that. And, but in the end, I intuitively thought that I needed to let him pursue his, what he wanted to do in life rather than hinder, because I thought, you know, I didn't want him to later on to look behind and say, I wanted to do this, but my mom didn't agree, so I followed another path.
Yeah.
And so I think through my having 3 boys, being a mother of 3 boys, it was very, very hard to sort of to understand these, you know, different paths, and all the paths were different to the ones that I was like trying to get them to lead, and especially with spirituality as well. I had to make the decision to teach them about spiritism, but then to let them go to sort of make their own choices as whether they want to follow on the philosophy or not, or whatever they want to do. But then I made the decision to have all my meetings that I have to do with spirituality in my kitchen, because this is where they are coming in and out. And so they are listening to what is going on. And so they are sort of going out, finding their own information, but then they're coming back home and they are asking me questions. And sometimes they are agreeing and disagreeing with me. And I think this is it's so important. And it's been very important to me not to sort of, in a way, force them or make them do what they follow spiritism, which is something that I don't think they would be happy to not to be choosing. And also it helped me, it's really like, it struck me right now when Anahy talked about spiritism and how we are drawn to certain aspects of spiritism. And now I know also that why I am drawn to the gospel. The gospel is my favorite book. I study all the other books, but I am more drawn to the gospel. And so I think it's very important, this information you brought, because although we know spirituality play huge part, you know, what we decide before we are born, I think we do. But it's important to sort of to understand why it's important as parents to guide our children, to let them sort of follow their own intuition and to sort of the path that they might be more drawn to, rather than making choices for them. So thank you for this information for them.
Well, I'm sure you made the right decision. What I have noticed in families is that you often get children with a different typology than the parents. So then the parents have to be tolerant, which is what you're describing. Yeah.
Andres, is that a hand? Is that your hand?
Lionel, I find it almost impossible and extremely difficult to make any decisions with my mind. I will not act up on anything if I do not have it as an intuition, and my heart has to underline it with great intent. Otherwise, I can't move.
Well, you're probably a strong feeling type, or feeling you're either your first or second function.
Yes. And I'm almost free. So if somebody asks me a question, I answer them always with emotions and feelings, and I can never respond to with an actual thought. And there's always a delay reaction, and I wait for my heart to underline it with a great intent. And it does it without fail.
Yeah.
So
you're going to have to, at some point you have to develop your fourth function. You know, I see this at Pacifica all the time where I teach. We get students who are strong feeling types, but they can't think clearly. So that's part of the training. You have to do that.
Making a decision is for me often almost impossible. So I rely on the divine. That's my spiritual side. The dear will let me know what I'm supposed to do next. Oh my God, my partner in crime is pulling his hair out.
So making a link on that question, talking about developing different function, would you say when someone goes to therapy, is there a way of that can be developed when someone goes through like maybe talk therapy?
I think it's a lifelong process. I'm not sure that I don't tend to focus on that in therapy. You might realize that somebody has sometimes the typology comes into the therapy. For example, my third function is introverted feeling. And so when I'm faced with somebody who has extroverted feelings, it feels like a Mack truck is coming at me, because there's like a barrage of feeling that is, you know, and I just want it all to quieten down. So sometimes one can comment on typology in therapy, but I haven't usually made it a big issue in therapy. But you do need to find a therapist who's got at least two functions that are the same as yours. Otherwise, the therapy doesn't work very well. Oh, that's true for husbands and wives as well, by the way. You don't have to have the same typology. You have to have two functions that are the same. And then the other two are different, and that makes them interesting. But if they're all different, there's nothing to talk about.
So two functions that is different than your therapist, right?
Or wife or husband, yeah, that's right. You need two the same, and that's just my view of it.
I think the last person would be Maria Silva.
Yeah.
Because we are almost in the time.
Okay. Yeah. What?
Hello. I'd like to ask about like when I have the parents like for example, like introverts and a child extrovert, and the parents are strict. It could influence this child to grow in a not good way, with development neurosis of some pathology because of this strict way that the parents raise the kids.
Yes, if the parents don't understand the child's typology, if the parents are very introverted and the child is very extroverted, they might not let the child go out and enjoy the outer world because of the projection. They think the child should be like me. They should be more inward and stay home. You know, so that can definitely cause trouble. Yeah, definitely.
And then the child function like an introvert person because of the parents.
We call that the greenhouse. They develop something artificially quickly that wouldn't be their typology.
Oh, okay. And about the spirituality, I don't know, it's like for more spiritism, maybe, and how to understand me. And you have a plan for here, and probably the child to become to be extrovert in some way that it works with the world to evolve. And for the plan, it has just this plan and come here and like like with the strict parents is influencing the spirituality also.
Well, the parents might try to force the child's spirituality into a direction that they wouldn't naturally take. That's the problem.
Okay. Thank you, Lionel.
Well, I think it's time to stop. What do you think?
Yes. Do you want to do any closing remarks, either you or Anahy, before we close the meeting?
I can't think of it.
Lionel,
Yes.
would you like to make any closing remarks? Well, actually, we don't have enough time, but just remind me that we forgot to talk about the symbolism of four, why Jung thought about 4 functions. It's not that it's so important, but we can talk later on. But anyway, I think we talked a little bit in the last meeting about the number 4. Would you like to say something about that?
Well,
Okay?
Jung was a little bit obsessed with the number 4. He thought it was a symbol of wholeness and completion and stability and sort of groundedness. Like when we talk about the earth having 4 directions, 4 seasons and so on. He thought that 4-ness was a function of, like, think of a square or a cube. It's very solid and grounded. He thought that was the quality of number 4. Unlike 3, which is much more action-oriented.
Okay, so thank you very much, Lionel. It was great. And we'll see everybody. Fabricio, when is the next meeting?
Yes, our next meeting is on the 24th of March, and the topic will be the mystery of the encounter and its challenges. Okay, so thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much. We'll see you there.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Have a good month.
Thank
Bye.
you.